Today we are going to be talking about how to order the correct material for a roof using an insurance estimate. What I have up on the left-hand side of the screen is an insurance estimate. On the top right, I have an ordering cheat sheet that details how to take some of these measurements and turn them into things that we can order. And in the bottom right, I'm going to use that as the area where I show my work and provide what needs to be ordered. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the field shingles. And if you notice under the field shingles, it says to find the field shingles in squares, take your tear off / surface area and multiply by your waste factor. Now this roof that we have in front of us, as you can see in the sketch, is a hip style roof that has a lot of valleys and it's pretty cut up. So we're going to use, on this one, we're going to use at minimum a 15% waste factor. We could go with a little bit higher if we wanted to be extra safe, but we're just going to use 15%. So we're going to do 39.87 squares. We're going to times that by 1.15, which, let me grab my calculator. Is going to get us 45.85. And then if we notice in the rounding rules, it says round up to the nearest 0.00, 0.33, or 0.66. So we're going to round this up to 46 squares of field shingles. Next, we are going to do the starter strip shingles. So to find how many bundles of starter strip to order, take your perimeter length and divide by 100. So we have a perimeter length on this house of 300.73 linear feet, and we're just going to divide that by 100 to get 3.073 bundles. Now with this and how close it is to being exactly 3 bundles, and with the crew having the ability to use some of the field shingles as starter strip shingles if necessary, we're probably actually in this case going to round down. This is one of the exceptions to the rule. Typically with starter strip shingles we're always going to round up, but how close it is, we're going to make that judgment call and round down to just 3. If it's anything, I would say above 0.1 or higher, definitely round up, but how close this is, I think we can get away with it. Next, we're going to do the hip and ridge shingles. So to find out how many bundles of hip and ridge, you should take the total hip, if applicable, and ridge length and divide by 28. Now with this, we're assuming that each bundle of hip and ridge shingles covers 30 feet. Some hip and ridge shingles can cover more or less depending on the type of hip and ridge shingles that we're using and the manufacturer. And so that's something that once you get to a storm, you're going to want to talk to the managers, either the production manager or the senior project manager, and find out what type of hip and ridge we're using with the supplier and what we should use for the coverage. But we're going to do 28 on this one. So we're going to take our total hip length, 235.89, plus our ridge length, which is 38.21, and that's going to get us 235.89 plus 38.21, 274.1 linear feet of ridge cap. Then we're going to take that, and it says after you do that, you're going to divide by 28. So we're going to take our 274, divide by 28. And that's going to get us 9.79 bundles. And then if we notice the rounding rules on this, it says round up to the nearest whole number. So we're going to do 10 bundles of hip and ridge shingles. After this, we're going to go to nails next. Now, first, before we go to nails, we need to find out the total squares. That's something that we use for several different items. And so you can follow these steps to find out how many total squares are needed, or how many total squares there are on this project. To calculate the total squares, follow this formula. Total squares equals the field shingles in squares plus the starters in bundles and ridge in bundles divided by 3. The reason that we divide by 3 is because for each 3 bundles of shingles, that equals 1 square. So essentially what we're doing is we're just converting bundles of starter and bundles of ridge into squares of starter and squares of ridge, and then adding that to squares of field to get our total squares. So in this case, we have 46 plus 3 bundles of starter plus 10 bundles of hip and ridge, and then that's going to be divided by 3. So first we're going to simplify to 46 plus 13 divided by 3, and then 13 divided by 3. Our next step for simplifying is going to be 46 plus 4.33, and then obviously we get 50.33 total squares. So now that we have our total squares, we can go back up to the nails section, and it says to find out how many boxes of nails to order, take your total squares and divide by 15. So we're going to do 50.33 divided by 15. And that's going to get us 3.36. And if we notice our rounding for this, it says round up to the nearest whole number. So we're going to have 4 boxes of nails. Next, we're going to look at plastic caps. So with plastic caps, to find out how many boxes of plastic caps to order, we're going to take the total tear off and divide by 20. So the total tear off here is 39.87 squares, and we're going to divide that by 20. That's going to get 1.99. And the rounding rules for plastic caps is round up to the nearest whole number. So we're going to have 2 boxes of plastic caps that we're going to order for this job. After that, we're going to look at the drip edge. So to find out how many pieces of drip edge, take the drip edge amount if it's on the insurance paperwork, which should be the same as the perimeter if we're replacing all of the drip edge, and divide by 10 and then round. So with drip edge, a couple things to consider. The first thing is looking at how the drip edge is installed into or installed with the gutters. So if the gutters are installed into the drip edge, we're not going to be replacing that because we'd have to take off the gutters on the entire house. But let's assume just for practice that even though this is a hip style house and it should have gutters all the way around, we're going to assume that we're replacing the drip edge and that it's not installed into the gutters. Also with drip edge, you don't have to replace it every time. If it's in good shape, plenty of times I will not replace the drip edge, and that's a way that you can save some costs and get a little bit more profit because it doesn't necessarily need to be replaced on every project. So first we're going to look at the drip edge amount, and it says 300.73 linear feet. We're also going to compare that with the total perimeter length to make sure that the insurance company is paying for all of the drip edge to be replaced. Because if these numbers are different, then that might be a situation where the insurance company is just paying for the drip edge to be replaced on the rakes. And that could be a supplement issue. And that also, if this number is lower than this number and we are trying to replace it on the entire house, then we need to order off the perimeter length. So we're going to take 300.73 and we're going to divide that by 10, and we're going to get 30.073. Now the rounding for drip edge is a little bit less specific in the sense that we want to have some extra pieces of drip edge because the crew has to cut the drip edge as they're installing it, and there is some waste. And the last thing that you want to do, the last thing that you would want to do on the day of construction is have to go get 2 or 3 extra pieces of drip edge and make a whole trip of that, especially with considering that the drip edge only costs somewhere between $8 to $10 per stick. And so even if you order 2 or 3 extra sticks, that's very little profit that you're going to lose if you don't end up using it. And the possibility of saving the time is definitely worth that slight profit decrease. So on this one, I'm actually going to go with an extra 5 pieces You could go with a little more or a little less, but I probably wouldn't order anything less than 4 or more pieces on this one. So I'm going to go with 35 pieces. Next, we're going to go and we are going to figure out our type of ventilation and what we should be ordering for ventilation. So this home actually has 3 different types of ventilation, which is not very common. Normally a home will only have one type of roof ventilation, or sorry, attic ventilation. So this is going to be great practice because there's actually a few different types that we're going to have to go through. The only type of roof ventilation that you're going to need to do any calculations for is the ridge vent. The other types of roof ventilation you can either count by getting up on the roof, or in this case, since we aren't able to get on the roof and we just have a copy of the insurance estimate, we're going to use the numbers that they gave us. So first, let's do ridge vent. It says to find out how many rolls of ridge vent, take the length in linear feet, either on the paperwork or as measured, and divide by 30. So this, once again, is using the assumption that each roll of ridge vent covers 30 feet. Now, there's some rolls of ridge vent that cover 20 feet, some rolls of ridge vent that cover 25 feet. So once you get to an area, just like I mentioned with ridge cap, you're going to want to get a hold of the production manager or a senior project manager to find out the type of ridge vent that we're typically getting and the coverage that it will have. So we're going to take our 29 feet and we're going to divide by 30. And obviously we can tell that this is going to be less than 1, but for an exact number, it's going to be 0.97. And so the rounding rules on ridge vent says round to the nearest whole number. So we're going to order one roll of ridge vent. Next, we have turtle vents or box vents. And actually in this situation, we do not have any turtle or box vents. But we do have turbine vents and a power attic vent cover. So we're going to order one turbine vent, assuming that we're replacing the turbine vent and it's damaged, and 2 power attic fan vent covers. Now, 2 things on this. With the power attic fan vents, each power attic fan can have a different style of cover, and so replacing them can sometimes be a little bit of a hassle. If you order one and it doesn't fit, obviously you can't really replace it unless you can find the exact one. If it looks like one that you've replaced previously and it's one that you know that the suppliers carry, you can give it a shot. But it's not always the easiest to replace these. So moving forward, we skipped past it, but we're going to go through the pipe boots. So pipe boots is similar to turtle, turbine, and power attic, where we're just going to take a look either on the roof or on the insurance paperwork to determine how much we're going to order. So in this situation, we're going to order 2 pipe boots. And then moving forward, we're going to look at paint and caulk. Now with paint and caulk, we're going to take our total squares and roughly use the idea of if it's less than 20, we order 1 can of paint and 1 tube of caulk, 20 to 32, 30 to 43, 40 to 54, etc. So we have 50.33 total squares. So we're going to order 5 cans of paint and tubes of caulk on this one. Next, we have the ice and water barrier. Now, if you notice on the insurance estimate, under all of these line items, you do not see ice and water barrier. I do see felt, which is another type of underlayment, but I don't see the ice and water barrier. Now, for simplicity in this video, we're not going to go through how to calculate ice and water barrier. I can make a video of that later using an eagle view where we have some exact measurements. Because to determine the ice and water barrier, you're going to need some pretty accurate measurements of the eaves and the valleys. And from this photo, I cannot see much. But another thing to look at is sometimes they will put the ice and water barrier in a different area of the paperwork because it's considered a code item that's only paid for after it's been incurred. So it's paid when incurred or paid when we've proven that we've installed it. And so if we scroll down on this estimate, if you see line item 14, it says code, and we're going to, just for the sake of simplicity and ease for this video, we're going to use the square footage that they gave us in our calculations. And so it says if you have the ice and water barrier in square feet, then all you have to do is divide by 200. So we're going to take our 2011 square feet and we're going to divide that by 200. And that's going to get us 10.06 rolls. Sorry, first we're going to do our rounding. And so with the rounding of ice and water barrier, we're going to round to the nearest whole number, round up to the nearest whole number. So we're going to get 11 rolls of ice and water barrier. So if we notice here, we see that we have 39.87 squares of felt. Now we're going to actually have to calculate how many squares of felt does need to be ordered, because the 39.87 is also the total surface area. So if we order based on this number, we will be ordering enough felt to cover the entire house on top of the 11 rolls of ice and water barrier. Whereas we should be subtracting the square footage of ice and water barrier from our square footage on the house to determine how much is installed with felt and how much is going to be covered with ice and water barrier. So the steps to do that is, we're going to start from step 3 here under the steps for calculating ice and water barrier and felt. We're skipping these steps. We used the number that they gave us in the paperwork for simplicity. I'll make a video later that goes through in detail how to do the ice and water barrier from step 1 through 4, or I guess it would be 5. But starting from this step, it says take the total tear off and subtract what is going to be covered with ice and water barrier to find out how much is going to be covered by felt. So our total tear off on this roof is 3,987 square feet, and we're going to subtract out the 2,011 square feet of ice and water barrier that we can see on line item 14 that's going to be covered, so that we can figure out how much is actually covered by the felt. So that leaves us with 1,976 square feet of felt. The next step is we're going to convert square feet of felt to squares of felt. So 100 square feet equals 1 square. And then we can take squares of felt and go back above under the felt section to determine how many rolls of felt needs to be ordered. So what we're going to do is we're just going to divide by 100. So we're going to take our 1,976 divided by 100, and that's going to leave us with 19.76 squares of felt. And then if we go back up to our synthetic felt area, it says if you have how many squares of felt is needed, then simply divide by 10. So we're going to take this 19.76 squares of felt, we're going to divide that by 10, and that's going to get us 1.976. And if we notice in our rounding instructions, it says round to the nearest whole number. So we're going to round that up to 2 rolls of felt. Now, 2 other things that we're going to want to get in here after we figure out everything that we need to order. And we have now figured out all of the main things that we need to order. But the 2 next things that we want to do is we want to get the ACV and the RCV. This is important because the ACV tells us how much we should be picking up in a first check from the homeowner on either the day of construction, the morning of construction, or when materials delivered. And the RCV is the total contract price that we're going to be writing down in the contract that we sign with the homeowner before supplements. So to find the ACV, we're just going to look at the ACV column, and it tells us our number right here in the total. So our ACV for this one is going to be $16,704.92. Now the RCV is going to be slightly more complicated in this specific situation. We have our $18,224.46, but as we mentioned earlier, there is going to be a code item here with the ice and water barrier. And so when these are crossed out, they're not in the estimate yet, and they're not paying for them yet. So this ACV amount, the homeowner is not going to receive that yet. But we need to add this crossed out number for the RCV into our total RCV so that we have the appropriate RCV to sign the job at. So then we're going to add this $3,051.72. And we're going to explain that to the homeowner so he understands where we're getting that number. And that's going to get us $21,276.18. So that's going to be our RCV. So that's it for this first video on how to order using an insurance estimate. I'll have some additional videos in the future showing how to order using an Eagle View, and we'll have a couple more walkthroughs with some basic insurance paperwork and also how to calculate the ice and water barrier correctly.